quantitative view of evaluation at DARPA, how this plays into a program like this that could initially seem like very difficult to evaluate.
Sure. I mean, so DARPA cares very much about how our programs are evaluated. When the program manager sells the program, he or she has to specify the metrics by which the program will be evaluated. Changing the metrics requires going up to the head of the agency and explaining why the metrics need to be changed. So that's a big deal, right? In the exponentiating mathematics program, the concept of the program is we can build sort of co-pilots for math, for pure mathematics, right? That can help state-of-the-art mathematicians do math faster. And so, like, how are we going to evaluate that? And the goal is to have people working at the forefront of math doing math faster. So there's kind of two thrusts in how they're going to do that. One is by redoing existing math by holding out lemmas and seeing if the AI-enabled system can find the missing lemmas. There's a little bit of a challenge of like, how exactly are you going to do that while making sure that the AI system didn't already know that that lemma existed. So that is in the PAA explicitly, calling that out as a challenge to ensure that that happens. And then the other part is by having mathematicians at the forefront of the field using the systems to see if they can push forward the forefront, which is a more qualitative assessment. Like, will they be able to do that without having an AI assistant? So one is quantitatively possible if you don't have examination. The other is qualitative, so not quantitative, but when you're doing stuff at the very frontier, it's very difficult to figure out. Like often the evaluation piece of a DARPA program is itself research, and because it's imprecise, because you don't know how to evaluate something that you've never done before. I mean, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's completely straightforward, but often it is itself research. And this is one of those where it's like, we don't know exactly how to do this, but we're going to be thinking about that as research as well.
I was just going to say it's refreshing to see that in plain black and white seems like from the onset of a very good evaluation plan there, a breath of fresh air for some of the industry. So,
cool. Yes?
Earlier you said that one of your values is doing things that generally make you happy, even if it's not just on a day-to-day basis. How do you think about situations where you decide that because of maybe like the other values in the list, there's going to be a thing you need to do first that is not going to make you happy, but is necessary to enable you to be happy later, or any of the other dependencies there?
Yeah. I'm pretty good at being goal-directed, so I'm good at things that I maybe don't want to do in the short term, like writing a document, because it will allow me to accomplish a longer term thing.
What about something bigger on the order of like, to use an example that I really know nothing about, if you want to do certain kinds of medical work, you're going through all of residency in the United States, it's quite a big deal and often will involve several years of like being far away from family and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Not really talking about like, I want to write this down.
Yeah. I don't. I think in that case, it's useful to put in place time limits. Like I'm willing to do this thing that is making me not happy for X amount of time, and then I'm going to reevaluate. Like, am I still willing to do this thing that is not making me happy? And being able, I think there it's really important to be able to judge how much emotional reserve do I have? Like, how long can I do this thing that is making me not happy? And how much is it impacting me to be able to keep doing this thing that's not making me happy? Like, there's pluses and minuses. Like, before I have to change and do something else. So 2 or 3 years of something that is miserable is a long time. 6 months, no big deal. 2 to 3 years is a really long time to do something that is mostly making you unhappy. But if it's making you a little unhappy, 2 or 3 years is fine. 2 or 3 years of it's hell on earth is too long.
Has there been a point in your life where you received hard feedback and that led to a lot of growth for yourself?
Yes and no. So when I went to AT&T, the AT&T was going to start a programming language group, and I was hired to be the theorist in the programming language group. And this was just as AT&T and Bell Labs was splitting. So in fact, I interviewed with both companies at the same time. They were still at Bell Labs, and so I really had no idea during the interview which people were at Bell Labs and which were at AT&T. I think they told me, but it didn't really. It was just a whirlwind of 3 days of interviews. But it turned out that was not a bad confusion because they were still switching back and forth. So I eventually got hired at AT&T and showed up at AT&T, but the people who wanted to start the programming language group, they were going to be at AT&T, but they ended up going back to Bell Labs. So I got hired at AT&T, but the people who really wanted to hire me ended up at Bell Labs. So I ended up at AT&T with no one at AT&T who wanted to have hired me, and with no programming language group at AT&T. So this is not a good idea, not good. They didn't tell me this particularly. But I realized pretty quickly that oh wait, this is not good. And so I switched pretty quickly from programming language theory to working on domain-specific languages. And I worked with Ann Rogers on building the Hancock domain-specific language for constructing signatures to track profiles of individual customers for fraud. So very applied work. My first evaluation was basically you are underperforming. Maybe my very first evaluation was you haven't been here long enough to get an evaluation. And my next evaluation, it was like a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 kind of scale. And I basically had a 2 on my evaluation. And it was like, you're not doing anything that's relevant to the company. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm working on it. And they're like, well, that's all Ann. You're like her postdoc. We expect you to be an individual researcher. And I'm like, that's insane, right? Ann was very much saying that we were co-researchers, right? And outside of the company, I was getting all the credit, and they were thinking Ann was just like my flunky. It was very weird. And maybe the next year they got a 3, and they kept we would have to submit your Form 1, which is kind of your personal self-assessment, which we call why I'm great in December, and then they gave you feedback in March, which was why you're not. It was kind of a joke. And they would tell me in March, you should do X, which was their response to the December form, and I would have done it in February, right? Which would be super, I just found this incredibly frustrating, right? That I'm moving all the way from a theoretical programming language person to an applied programming language person. You're giving me 0 benefit of the doubt. And then, so that was for a couple, maybe I moved up to a 3. And then Ann left the company and went to Chicago. And I started a new project, the PADS project, which is about declarative data description languages, which they really, really liked. And I went all the way up to a 5, right? They're like, oh, she was right. She was working on it. So I know that counts exactly of, getting hard. That was hard feedback. And what did I do? I just basically kept doubling down on what I was doing before because I knew what I was doing was right. They just were being very slow on responding to what I was doing. Plus, they changed my manager to be somebody who was more receptive to the work that I was doing. still super frustrating.
What were so you were talking about these questions, and that H4 is sort of this list of different ways you might roll out the answer to this research hypothesis. What was your research, what did you see for HACMs initially, and do you think that?
Well, what was the H4 question for HACMs? It was a long time ago. It would be something like, well, I could answer, well, let's see. The answer would be something like, we would have software that would be much harder to hack into. I could tell you now what we're doing, because interestingly, the DARPA is now working on transitioning HACM's technology across the entire defense industrial base. So 2 years ago, when we were doing a program review for the formal methods part of the I2O portfolio, the head of the agency said, well, you've transitioned formal methods technology to 23 different military relevant systems. That's not good enough. You need to transition it to the entire defense industrial base, to the entire DoD, and to all of critical infrastructure. Let's, snap, go. So we've been working on that. So to do that, we've convened roundtables with the 6 DIB primes and the head of acquisition and sustainment, the head of R&E, the head of DOT&E, and Amazon Web Services. That was a really interesting roundtable. That was in May of last year. One of the DIB primes was like, we're using formal methods, but we can't get paid for it because it's not a requirement. Another DIB prime is like, well, we know how to use formal methods, but we're not because we can't get paid for it. Another DIB prime was like, what are you talking about with respect to formal methods? Can we pay somebody to do that for us? The ANS, which is the organization that more or less manages requirements, not exactly, but kind of, they were like, we can't require formal methods because the DIBs don't know how to use them. Amazon Web Services talked about how they use formal methods kind of everywhere. And Amazon Web Services talked about how Amazon doesn't have to worry about things falling out of the sky. And Amazon's like, we have satellites too. That was great. It was super great. We challenged each of the DIB primes to go back to their home institution and find some system where they could apply some formal methods-based approach and come back at another roundtable in December and report out on that. I should say we define formal methods really very broadly, so anything from using a type-safe language or a memory-safe language, all the way to using an interactive theorem improving things correct. Verified parsers, like using a parser generator is one of our sweet spots because that's very actionable, it's very concrete, and it's memory validation errors are like 80% roughly of the CVEs are related to not doing memory validation correctly. So like just getting rid of handwritten parsers and non-memory safe languages would go just super far to getting our software to be much more accurate, less vulnerable. So they all did that. They came back. They challenged us. Like they kept asking us, well, how much would it cost, and how much improvement would it be? So DARPA started our capstone program. So we're partnering with each of the services to go out and find a system that is where they could do a red team assessment of part of the system, do a formal methods retrofit, and document in best practices exactly what was done and exactly how much it cost. What was the expertise of the people who did the retrofit, and then do another red team assessment to figure out how much was the improvement. So we're launching all those right now. And then we had the Resilient Software Systems Colloquium on June 17th, which is the video that is replacing the second lecture that I'm not giving, was part of that, where we basically delivered the message that I just talked to you guys about how our sense of learned helplessness is leaving us incredibly vulnerable, how we actually know how to build software better, and how the community is part of the solution by using things like technology that is 10, 15 years old. We're not talking about using DARPA cutting-edge technology. We're talking about using parser generators. We're talking about using memory-safe languages. We're talking about using, SysML version 2 or AADL or we're talking about, using SEL4, like things that are old, basically, but tried and true. You can go use bleeding edge stuff, that'd be great too, but you don't have to use that stuff, just go use the tried and true stuff. So that would have been stuff that could have been in the H4 for hackers. I think at this point we are probably over time, and we should let you guys go. Thank you for your time and attention, much appreciated.
Okay, on the topics webpage, you will find a link